rumours of massive amounts of sales of Chelsea players. But of course, it being Chelsea, it's because they want to buy other players. So what do we know about what's going on there?
One of the funniest things, and we didn't really talk about it, but it was over a month ago. Todd Bowley, Speedy Todd, was one of the key speakers at one of those Soccer X conferences out in the Middle East. And when he was asked to talk about, how he's portrayed and everything, what he said was the English media just portray it through their lens. They don't really understand how football works, which I thought was kind of funny. Todd Bowley saying that after, trade deals and the man who sold the training ground and the hotel back to himself and everything. But it kind of got mentioned in this, Trev, that when he was in that conference about, do you remember how you tried to buy Sporting Lisbon, but you couldn't because you can't own two clubs at once and all this? He's like, yeah, there are limitations, but we'll see what happens with the City case and what that means for, football rules and ownership. And it's kind of funny that it was asked about, buying Sporting Lisbon, because if you can't buy the club, what you can do is buy all their players ahead of the summer. And what would you think if you're a Chelsea fan? You're thinking, right, let me think. Madueke, Mudryk, all that. We've got about 20 Sancho. We've got about 26 wingers. What do we need? That's right. We'll agree a deal ahead of the summer for a talented young winger. Now, just to be clear on this, from what I'm hearing and because I've never watched this kid, so I can't pretend I'm no scout on that. I won't lie. But from digging around, that there's high hopes for Quenda. He's supposed to be a real talent done at Sporting Lisbon, and Ruben Amorim wanted, didn't he, at Manchester United, who will also come on to. But they've already agreed this deal for about, I think it's 44th, around that mark. So it's not cheap change. Oh, and by the way, Trev. Oh, yeah. There's only Willian Estevao, another player who can play winger, joining this summer. That young player, the South American kid they spent big money on. And, oh, yeah, there's only Kennedy Paez, another young winger who they spent a fortune on this summer. So already, before the summer starts, we know there are 3 players who can play on the wing coming into Chelsea. That's on top of, that team who desperately need a centre forward. But I guarantee you there must be someone in that boardroom who's going, we need a centre forward. We need a centre forward badly, a central focal point for the goals. Just hear me out though, lads. Have 16 wingers. Think of that Moneyball approach. I don't think Moneyball means have 16 wingers instead of 1 striker, but just honestly, 3 players who can play on the wing possibly coming in to Chelsea. And as someone said in the chat panel, Arsenal aren't going to take up the option on Raheem Sterling, are they, as well? So that's another winger coming. Just crazy. But Sporting Lisbon, remember Sporting Lisbon, because it doesn't stop there. Chelsea have also, and I'm probably going to butcher his name, agreed a deal with, you've guessed it, Sporting Lisbon for Dario Asugo, I think it's pronounced. He's on loan at another club, 22 million euros. And you've got to love how they do their contracts, because as they both have agreed, a 7+1 year deal. So 8 years, essentially, Trev, another one of these big contracts, ready for the Club World Cup. So literally 2 players from Sporting Lisbon, the 2 South American kids that are going to come, 4 players are joining Chelsea, and the window's not even open. And the brilliant thing is, they couldn't buy Sporting Lisbon. So God bless Beanie Twad. What does he do? Just buy all their young players instead. That's the alternative.
You'd like to say that you have a handle on just how Todd Bowley is going to get, but he just keeps bowling harder. And that is some wild stuff you've been describing. And God bless him and his constant source of entertainment for us. Just a shame they couldn't manage to actually beat Arsenal when they could have been useful to us there quite recently. Yeah. You mentioned United, and during the week, we all had a tremendous chuckle at the videos going out and about where poor old Ratcliffe there, man of the people, just talking to Gary Neville about how hard it is to to earn a crust, and Gary's going, but who will feed the people? And Gary's doing his working class hero thing, and both of them are bullshitters, but it was entertaining.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you've got the three-pronged circus tent plans for the new stadium. And you go, okay, how does that tally with this new sort of cost-cutting things? And we learned then that this dude has some plans to tap up taxpayer money to fund this thing. How that's going to happen, I have no idea, but I think it's even fascinating that it would be floated out there. How then can we possibly be talking about them in terms of funds? Or are we talking about how United, if this thing is indeed on the horizon, and God knows they've done a very fancy promo video with the entirely boring tones of Gary Neville whining over it. It's obviously a real thing that they want to do. What's that going to do to their budget? We've seen what new stadiums do to clubs in terms of their ambition in the transfer market. It can be quite impactful.
I mean, Sir Jim, the Man United fan, dedicated, always wanted to come in and help and resolve the club. So we'll just ignore the fact he tried to buy Chelsea and the fact he tried to get a bit of Barcelona. But that aside, anyway, he comes in, he does his interview, and as he said, and these are his words, the club would have run out of money before Christmas. I mean, let's not pretend. The Glazers are our favourite ever United owners. They're just funny, aren't they, what they've done and like how they stripped it back. But as Big Jim says, they would have run out of money before Christmas. So you think, wow, they start cutting back on Margaret's not allowed a free cheese sandwich or anything like that, and all the key cost-cutting exercises that go on to raise money. And then the big stadium plans come out, don't they, Trev? This £2.5 billion stadium. You remember that club that were going to run out of money by Christmas? And as he also said in that interview, all his money's pretty much gone as well, the amount he invested in servicing the debt and everything else. They're going to do this. And I mean, it's just scandalous a little bit, isn't it? Because Andy Burnham, and he's even used his old Northern powerhouse phrase that he used at his Labour Days, didn't he, for certain times, that this stadium can elevate us and, blah, 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 and all this. I.e., let's be crystal clear, we need taxpayers' money to do this because we could borrow to the hilt, but they can't really borrow anymore. And if anyone's thinking anything about that, Jim Ratcliffe also mentioned in his interview, we can't just keep going to the banks. That was a phrase he used. So you can dress it up, but they're trying to get taxpayers' money, aren't they? Because that's probably the way they're going to have to do it if they can indeed build this giant circus tent monstrosity thing with its giant poles, that they're trying to do. It's just absolutely insane. But as a few journalists, and we do digging around and asking like we normally are, they're starting to get blanked a bit on the details, Trev, because people are asking, well, if you do get this grant, bursary, whatever you want to call it, how are you going to prove that that money's entirely separate? I.e., if Manchester United needs 300 million or whatever it is to service its debts and keep it going and all the things, and he talked about in that interview, didn't he? We've got to pay this transfer this summer and this and this and this. If the taxpayers are to give them a huge chunk of change, and the billion quid they're looking for, how can the taxpayer guarantee that that money goes towards a stadium exclusively? How can we separate those? Because how do we know we are not giving our tax dollars for them to get another shit winger, basically? There is real questions which journalists, as they say, are asking United about it. And even, all the part of this campaign, Andy Burnham and all those are very silent on this point. So it is one to watch, because all of a sudden, my worry is, if Manchester United, who we know we're going to run out of money before Christmas, start making signings this summer, it's a case of where they got that money from. National insurance, education cuts. That's what that is, the first thing. It's just crazy, isn't it? So there are a few questions, and it is really one to keep an eye on. But it doesn't tally that a club that was going to run out of money before Christmas, now wants to build a 2 and a bit billion stadium, and as also their owner or their part owner, whatever you call him, saying we can't just keep going to the banks for money. Tell you what, so I hope some investigative journalist is right on this.
The potential for a fantastic story in this is just through the roof. And the cognitive dissonance between, within hours, seeing Gary Neville quizzing him up about why Margaret and Hilda can't have a cheese sandwich and why Eric and Waza can't come back and do a charity match to pay for the ex-players' funds or whatever. And then literally less than a couple of hours passed, and I'm seeing him narrating the promo video for the sci-fi big top that's going to be their new home. It's wild, and it's tremendously entertaining, and God bless them for it, because we do need a distraction. Let's finish just with a reference to Saudi, because we started talking about this a while ago, that Saudi were the big disruptors and they were going to have this massive impact. And it was initially, and then it went away. And now it seems to be a slow build back to where they are genuinely players in this market again, having gone quite quiet for a couple of windows.
Yeah.
What do you make of the potential for them being that disruptive force again in the summer to come?
Real chance. Yeah, they had last summer off a little bit, didn't they? They sort of trimmed their belt, so they just managed it. And then they got a bit crazy in January, didn't they? To be fair, with the Nunes situation, Duran, a few others, they made a few moves, didn't they? And you thought, okay, they're going to go again. Now, it's just so hard for the world of football to bring Saudi Arabia in line with how everything else works in Europe, CONCACAF, Copper, all the other associations, because they're that rich, they kind of just do what they want a little bit. And do you remember we even had that story last January where FIFA were threatening them because they weren't paying the final installment to the new Saints in Wales for like a 30 because the player they thought was crap, so they just refused to play it. Like, no, that's not how it works. You can't wait and see how the player does and then refuse to pay it. Like, they just do, you're trying to rule over billionaires and people who money doesn't really mean that much to, because they've just got bucket loads of it. So it is different in that sense. The other big thing we're getting now, and there's a few eyes being drawn to it, that Club World Cup is coming up, isn't it, Trev? Right as almost our season ends, that starts. And it's almost a case of that the crossover is so small, as in the Premier League window, I think, in Saudi is at line to open about the 12th of June. And then that Club World Cup starts, I think it's the 15th of June in America. Now, there's 2 Saudi teams in that. And what's already being talked about is, I can't remember who it's one, Al Hilal's one, and there's another one. But there's even talk of players moving to Al Hilal just for that tournament.
Wow.
So Saudi can showcase their best possible team, to the world and say, look at us, type of thing in that regard. So don't be surprised if that happens. But we know the likes of Darwin Núñez is very admired. Very admired. So in that regard, would it surprise you if they're trying to do a deal where it's like literally done just before that starts up? And it's literally that short a crossover in that regard. So it is one to really keep an eye on for the summer. They may be almost the first movers because of that of the summer window.
Yeah, smashing angle, that one. And very, very high potential, I think, for a couple of mad moves there with that one, maybe including one of our own. Or maybe even 2 of our own. Let's see how that one works out. We've already said it. This is a mad time. This is one of the most unsettled I've felt in ages, and it's wild that we're 6 wins away from establishing ourselves as league champions. I'm a little bit unsettled about how people are already talking about how it's done. I do understand that mentality, and you don't want to think that these lads are going to fall off so badly that it's not going to happen. But there's just that feel at the moment about like, can we resettle here? Can we just get back to some sort of solid winning ways, and then maybe you can have an adult conversation about all the massive upheaval that needs to happen. But look, we want to say thanks to everyone who's watching live. Fair play to me. Good numbers there again, Dave. Thanks to you if you're commenting, and if you're just chatting amongst yourselves in the comments, that's also great. Gives us something to sort of track whether we're on track or not. We do appreciate that. And as ever, I appreciate Dave and all the work he does to put this show together in terms of gathering the information. So yet again, cheers, buddy.
Yeah, it's a fun one. Let's just hope by the time we come back, we are not using the word or phrase hard reset anymore.
Just don't want to think about it. It's just not okay. So make it go away, Liverpool. Thanks very much. And we'll talk to you all very soon.